So let's talk about ethical clothing. What is it? It's an umbrella term to describe ethical fashion design, production, retail, and purchasing. It covers a range of issues such as working conditions, exploitation, fair trade, sustainable production, the environment, and animal welfare. It's a trend that not enough people are following. It's easier to purchase cheap clothing when trends are constantly changing, and it's easier to turn a blind eye at all of the suffering that goes into making it. The fact of the matter is that people really should bring themselves to learn more about what goes into making a lot of the clothes they have in their closet, like ethical sourcing and production. The world needs to turn toward ethical clothing. In order to do that, we need to change a lot about our consumer habits. So first, I'll talk about the environmental harm that fast fashion causes, ethical sourcing and discuss materials origins, or ethical production and labor abuse that goes into it. And lastly, why more people really should consider purchasing ethically sourced material. There is a major climate change issue hiding in your closet, and it's fast fashion. To start off, oil-based polyester clothing today replaces cotton as the number one fiber in our clothing. People really don't know about this, and a lot of companies that we outsource production of clothing to really have low environmental regulations. They use coal because it's cheap, and they mass produce clothing that is bad for the environment. Comparing plastic bags to plastic clothes, when you throw away your clothing, it's a wreak havoc on the environment. Certain materials also require more resources to produce. We purchase so much clothing from international countries, and it takes a toll on the environment because of transportation pollution. Fast fashion uses more resources from the environment. These countries that mass produce such clothing release toxins and pesticides into the atmosphere. This can be harmful for the health of many people. It has a high carbon footprint, and the ugly truth of the matter is that clothing landfill waste is real. When thrift stores have too much clothing, they offload the rest to third world countries. It really isn't ecological to have a mass amount of produced clothing shipped from one country to another, and then another once again. It damages the indigenous clothing industry, and it goes to show how harmful unethical clothing can truly be toward the environment. Similarly harmful to the environment, unethical clothing can harm animals being used and killed, and humans being exploited during the process as well. Muling by the wool industry is a very controversial topic. Not only is it abusive, but ineffective. It violates animal cruelty laws. The overload of wool on these animals causes heat exhaustion, and they're not put under anesthetics when cutting the skin from them. The counterargument for this is that it prevents infection and death for many of the sheep. Still, there should be a better way to go about this. There are also some facets of cotton production which are ethically questionable. Many people from third world countries, especially Uzbekistan, are severely exploited on a mass scale. Many of these workers also go through what is really slave labor, often forced to work 12 hours a day. Children, too. This is exploited by the government, where they face high fines and possible arrest if they refuse to comply. Cotton also uses pesticides, which pollute the groundwater. This is the water that third world countries use to drink. This can cause disease and illness for many people since they can't afford to drink anything else. Cashmere production also brings up a problem. The production of cashmere negatively impacts not only the goats that are shorn, but the farmers who raise them and the environment that it devastates. Climate change in places like Mongolia, where many cashmere goats are naturally indigenous to the geography, the heavy weight of fur that they are forced to shear result in the goats dying of hypothermia. Cashmere is increasing in demand, and this puts a strain on the farmers to raise more goats. With the growth, there is overgrazing that occurs. It eventually leads to desertification of the land. It's also happening in other places as well, such as northern China. Farmers are also being exploited in the process price-wise. In fact, there has been a rising issue with middlemen getting in between the trade of cashmere. Taking the product from farmers to sell, they increase the price and keep the profit. This price exploitation is bad for the farmers who are missing out on the money. Now, as mentioned before, it is important to understand how clothing is being produced, but it's also important to bring ourselves to learn more about and engage in its conversation. In fact, we need to start questioning where our clothes are being produced in the first place. Beyoncé, one of the most popular female empowerment icons of today, although extols a feminist ideology, has a company that does not use ethical sourcing in the production of her clothing line. These Sri Lanka workers are exploited as they labor to produce a clothing line that many people are not aware abuses their workers. And there are so many people, mostly women in the US, that go through clothing too quickly, and so this is why fast fashion has increased in popularity. We need to better educate ourselves about the process that goes behind the clothing that we wear. Beyonce is praised by many feminists, but the fact of the matter is that there is a large feminist movement in regards to ethical clothing. If most workers who are making their clothes are women, shouldn't they be supporting their rights? Empowerment shouldn't come at the cost of exploitation. And this is important to understand. Because ethical production doesn't involve slave labor, doesn't exploit or abuse animals, and it isn't too costly for those who produce it. As fashion is increasing within our society, it needs to be stopped. Not only is it detrimental to those who produce it, but also to those who consume it. And the truth of the matter is that cheap clothing doesn't last. Yeah, it's less expensive, but they often fall apart and are soon dumped into the environment. And with cost per wear, the ridiculousness of fast fashion can be laughed at. One item may cost only $20, but if you only wear it once, then of course it isn't worth the money. With a more expensive shirt, not only will you be guaranteed that it'll last longer, but you can also know that it was produced in an ethical way without harming the environment, workers, animals, etc. And so ethical clothing, hopefully, can one day be a forefront in our purchasing decisions.